So we're continuing to read the book of Galatians and unpack the Greek grammar that we see here. Let's pick it up again in verse 13. Hekusate garten emen anastrophe potein to judaismo, otikat hyperbolein, diokon ten ecclesian tuteu ke eparthroon evtein. Paul says, "For you heard concerning my conduct when formerly in Judaism, that I used to persecute God's church excessively and was seeking to uh, destroy it, ravage it. Eparthun. Hekusate. So Paul opens up this section with a grounding clause, a gar, and here he's just introducing supporting evidence for his claim in verse 12 that he did not receive the gospel from any man but through a revelation of Jesus Christ. And so he says tein amen anastrophein, which is simply here an accusative of reference. We would classify this. So he's saying with regard to my former way of life, and here's the word former, pote. Where was his former way of life? Well, it was in to Judaismo, in Judaism. As I said, pote is an adverb, and this adverb is more closely related to the prepositional phrase following it. So he's saying essentially, when I was formerly aligned with the Jewish way of life. And I think here we could assume, like an elided ame verb. Uh, and so we could assume that that's there. So it would be like he was saying, for you heard concerning my conduct when I was formerly aligned with the Jewish way of life. More woodenly, for you heard concerning my conduct when formerly in Judaism. That, and he's going to go on to the rest of the clause. So here's your matrix verb, and you've got your grounding conjunction, and then you have, these constituent parts: prepositional phrase, the adverb, um, and so not a whole lot to say here in terms of the grammar, just except for tain, amen, anastrophein, as an accusative of reference with regard to my former way of life is essentially what he's saying there. Into judaismo. We could classify this as, if we're asking the question what kind of dative, we could say this is like a dative of sphere, which Paul's using to operate. He's saying he used to operate within the sphere or within the world of Judaism. That was his way of life. And there's a very strong focus here on a Jewish way of life, Judaismo. So let's say that's option one. That was his former way of life, and that's the former way, which is Judaism. And then there's the now way, which is the gospel way. And there's a very strong pitting of these two things against one another. That there's a strong separation between his former life and his now life. And so there's this strong focus here on a Jewish way of life as opposed to a gospel way of life. And I think it's worth paying attention to that distinction here. The life in Christ is at fundamental loggerheads with Jewish religious living. In Judaism means the Jewish religion as opposed to Hellenism. And here, in this context, it means the Jewish religion as opposed to Christianity, gospel Christianity. The word Judaismo, oddly enough, it actually only occurs here and in the very next verse, and nowhere else in the New Testament. Justin Martyr, however, uses this word, and he also uses a very similar word, Christianismos, which was his expression for Christianity, Both words, you'll note, are made from this idzo, this sort of idzo root. All right, so this is into judaísmo. All right, now what he's going to do is, since we've broken that part of the verse down, he's going to move forward here, and what's going to connect us here is this hoti, and the hoti here is introducing the clausal component of the matrix verb. So here's our matrix, and let's say we have a break here, and in here we have the clausal complement of the matrix hekusate. This hoti is a hoti of content versus a causal. This is not causal, so it's not because, but it's translated that. And actually, what it's doing here is it's opening up indirect discourse. And that's how that hoti is functioning there. And then he says kaf hyperbolein. This is pretty idiomatic. It's really just a way of Paul to express the idea that his persecution of God's church was hyperbolein. It was excessive. It was extraordinary in character. It was over the top. It was radical. It was extreme. Those would be synonyms. And this is the persecution. His persecution was what? It was extreme. It was excessive. Ediokon, and just a note, there's this here, this we've got this imperfect tense, and just pay attention to the verbal aspect here is one that's progressive, it's durative, it's denoting habitual activity. So Paul's saying he was attacking Christ's church, and that was his regular, consistent pattern of behavior. And he wasn't just attacking it, he wasn't just persecuting it, he was excessively persecuting it. And what was he persecuting? Well, here it is. Tein ecclesian tu teu, the church of God. This is just the accusative, direct object of ediokon, which is the verb. So it's the direct object of persecute. And then you just have the possessive genitive attached, right? This is God's church. It's not just the church, it's the church of God. It's God's church. So you got that possessive genitive there. God's church was the object of the persecution. And then you have eparthun, and this is the final verb here in this sentence. And eparthun, again, is another imperfect active, indicative first person singular. And this comes from portheo, an epsilon contract verb. And this is a word that's used all over Greek literature. And it's used pretty much in military contexts. You see it to describe pillaging, ravaging, looting, conquering of a city through physical violence. And so I like to gloss this word, something like ravage. It just tends to make sense in most contexts. You could even, I think, appropriately use the word annihilate. So the idea is to attack the church with the intent or the result of destroying it, of annihilating it, of utterly ravaging it. And that's why it's appropriate for him to use the expression hyperbole, excessively so, was his persecution. So we move to verse 14. Que proekopton into judaismo hyperpalus, sune likiotas into genemu perisoteros zelotes hyparkonton patrikon mu paradosion. And I was making greater progress in Judaism than many of those of my own age among my own race, being far more zealous for the traditions of my fathers. Um, the paradosion, the traditions of the fathers of me, of my fathers. Well, so let's look at a couple of things here. Proekapton uh, comes from prokapto, and it just means to advance or to move forward. To progress, really, it means to progress to an improved state in most cases. We would say, using modern idiom, to level up. Paul's saying is, I leveled up in Judaism. So my contemporaries, those people of my own age and my own race, they were at, a certain level, but I was leveling up. I was making greater progress in Judaism than they were. This is an old verb, prokapto in Greek. In a very literal sense, the verb just means to cut forward. You think about a forest. If this was a forest and it was very dense, and you started here and you cut a path forward through the forest, cutting down all the trees and making a pathway through, that's that's the that's the word picture that you have here with prokapto, to blaze a trail. And here we're looking at an imperfect active, which again carries the nuance of continual habitual action. And so what's happening is God steps into this advancement uh, that Paul was making, and by God stepping into the middle of that advancement in his progress, he fundamentally alters the course of Paul's life. And that's what actually we're going to see here in verses 15 and 16. We're going to see this. We're going to see this, but God business, and like we have in Ephesians, there's this divine intervention. And again, we see this phrase, into judaismo, right? We had it up here, and we see it again in 14. So, and I was making greater progress in Judaism. And so this is the sphere by which Paul was making his progress, his advancement. And then we have the introduction of a comparative clause, which is this, hyper palus sunelikiotas. This is a comparison. The noun sunelikiotes is a reference to people of the same age group or the same stage in life, and hence we could translate or gloss this peers or contemporaries. But either way, it's just someone of one's own age. Sunelikiotes, reference to people of the same group, same age. It's a compound word which comes from Attic Greek, and the word that you see in Attic Greek, actually, it simply shows up as uh, helikiotes, helikiotes, and um, and but the compound, actually, this form really comes from here. You have the sin prefix, so you pay attention to that prefix, and then you have, after the sin prefix, you've got the uh, helikia, helikia, sun helikia. That's the etymology of where that word comes from. And then Paul uses the expression into regenimu. So he is advancing in Judaism, or he's making greater progress in Judaism than many of his own age, where among his own race, among my own race. among his own people. This again is the idea here is sphere. This is the sphere in which he is making his progress. And the only thing he's doing here is he's just attaching a genitive modifier at the end of this genitive of relationship. So among my own race. And then you have perisoteros. Perisoteros, just note the os ending here. That's going to tip you off that you're dealing with an adverb. And in this case, we're dealing with a comparative adverb. So you've got perisoteros, this comparative adverb. He leaves the object of comparison, oddly enough, unexpressed in the participial clause which follows. It's just not there. But since he just mentioned his peers or contemporaries, this sunilikiotes, we can assume that this is who he's comparing himself with. So he's saying that he advanced, he made greater progress in Judaism than many of his own age among his own race. Um, he was being far more zealous than whom? Than his sunelikiotas, than his contemporaries, than his peers. Right? He was being far more zealous than they were for what? For the traditions of my fathers, of my ancestors, being far more zealous, iparkon, being far more zealous for the traditions of my fathers. So when we put it all together, perisoteros, zelotes, iparkon, we could say being far more zealous for something. And what is it that he's far more zealous for? Ton patrikon mu peridoseon, for the traditions of my ancestors, and you just have the genitive of reference there with reference to the traditions of my fathers. And one more note, hiparkon, it's just a present active participle from hiparko, which just means to be in a state of something. So in this case, it's a state of being so exceedingly zealous for the tradition of his fathers. Um, Paul's big point here is that he was so Jewish, right? Into Judaismo, he was so wrapped up in the Jewish way of life, in the Jewish religion, that he was advancing far beyond all of his contemporaries. He was zealous for the traditions of his fathers. He was heavily, excessively persecuting the church of God. And he's making this big deal out of this pre-Jesus life and post-Jesus life. So all this stuff is pre-Christ, and it is excessively Jewish. Um, the, so we could if we were doing theology here, or we wanted to make application, we could talk about the implications of what this means. Um, Paul is quite happy to strip himself, to divest himself of his Jewishness, in so much as it's related to his former way of life, his former religious way of life. And you can take that application where you want to go with it, with regard to Christianity today and how we live and conduct ourselves. Paul is eager to divest himself of Jewish religious liturgy, in so much as it is contra the gospel and contradictory to the message of the gospel. So that is verse 14. Now moving on to 15 then. Hote de evdokesen, hoteos, notice that's in brackets, ho apharisas me ek kilias metros mu ke kalesas diates charitos aftu. But when, here's your post positive, de, This is going to be an adversative, right? So we're dealing with contrast, a contrastative statement. But when it pleased God, which we're going to put in brackets here, when it pleased God, the one who set me apart from the time I was in my mother's womb, and who called me through his, something like Charitas Avtu, I would translate it something like his generous kindness. I think that's a nice expression and that accurately conveys caritas. So what's happened here? Hoti then is introducing a temporal clause, and here, when it's used with the, is indicating a new development in the narrative. The context is what determines, whether the here is continuative, translated and, or whether it's adversative and translated but. And here it's clearly adversative. He's saying because this is his former way of life, but something happened when God stepped in. There is this but God moment. Hotheos is the nominative subject of evdokesen, but you'll notice that it's in brackets here. It's not included in the oldest manuscript, so it's likely in addition to the original text, which would just say something like, but when it pleased the one who set me apart, right? So if you assume that this is not in the text, then we would just read, but when it pleased the one who set me apart, aphorisas, when it pleased the one who set me apart. And so the referent is still the same regardless, which we know to be God, but it should be noted it's probably not original. And if it is original, so let's assume that actually this is in the text, and if it is original, then hotheos and hoapharisas would be an apposition. So these two would just be like we would just simply put an equal sign between the two. But when it pleased God, namely the one who set me apart. But reading the textual commentaries, I think it's in brackets for a reason, and so probably the text in its purest form reads, "But when it pleased the one who set me apart, ek kilias metros mu, from my mother's kilias womb." In other text, it's translated stomach, but it can be translated womb or stomach. But set me apart, clearly, in this case, from my mother's womb, and called me, as we said, and called me through his generous kindness. Regardless here, ho aphorisas, that we know is in the text, and it's an aorist active participle. So if hotheos is not in the text, and it's likely not, then the participle here is just functioning substantively instead of attributively. And aphorizo, as a verb, this is another one of these old Greek words, which actually, if you break it down etymologically, it comes from apo and horos, apahoras, and it's a crasis of those two words, meaning to separate or to divide. So Paul considers himself a Pharisee who was separated unto the gospel of God. Just check out the language in Romans 1:1. Before his birth, God had divine plans for Paul, and at the right time called him into the service of the gospel. So we actually have two participles in this verse, and both are modifying hotheos, or both functioning substantively. You have ho apharisas as one, and then you have Kalesas as a second one, both aorist active participles, the one who set me apart and the one who called. Okay, and both are just expressing, an action that was completed, that took place sometime. So if we put all this together, we would have something like, the one who set me apart from my mother's womb and the one who called me by his grace or by his generous kindness. And note the me here, the pronoun, first person pronoun. This is the direct object of both of the participles that are in play. Here in a minute, I'm just going to show you this text diagrammed out so that you can just really map this out. We'll just take a look at this and see where all the pieces are. But we could look at all of this and map it all out and see, and we'll just take a look at that in just a minute, just so it's clear. Okay, so moving on then to verse 16, apocalypse ton huion eftu in imi in evangelizome efton intis ethnesen eftheos u pras anethemein sarkike haimati. So to write starts with an infinitive. Okay, I'm going to pick it up with an infinitive. To reveal his son, the son of him, in me. And then you have hina plus a subjunctive, in order that I should proclaim the good news about him, where intis ethnason, among the Gentiles. And he says immediately, he did not do something. He did not pros anethemein. He did not consult with flesh and blood. In other words, human beings. And in a minute, he's going to talk about who these human beings were. They were apostles. They were the before me apostles, the ones who had entered into the faith first. He did not consult with them, and that's what he wants to make clear. So in verse 16, you start off with apocalypse, this aorist active infinitive, and this is functioning as the complementary. It's actually, let me just delete this. This is a complementary infinitive. So what is it? What is it completing? It's completing the verb evdokesen, right? When it pleased God, because all this stuff is just modifiers, right? The one who called me, separated me before my mother's womb and called me by his generous kindness, right? That's all parenthetical. So if you really want to grab the matrix sentence, it is, but when it pleased God to reveal the Son of him in me, in order that purpose clause that I might do something, right? So this is the complementary infinitive. Ton huion eftu then just becomes the accusative direct object of apocalypse, and in imi probably carries here a locative sense, where he's, the idea is there's an inward revelation of Jesus Christ as the Son of God to Paul. Paul is attributing this revelation to God's initiative. It is God who chose to reveal the Son of him, or his Son, in me. Locative idea. And then you have, as I said, this second half of the sentence, right? The purpose clause. in order that I might preach good news, um, in order that I might proclaim the good news about him. Um, what good news? The about him good news, in order that I might proclaim. You see the subjunctive here. The purpose of God's revealing his Jesus to Paul was so that Paul would begin to proclaim the good news about Christ. Where? In tis ethnasen, among the Gentiles. Evangelizomai is a present active subjunctive, right? So present active subjunctive. And as we routinely see with hina, you've got hina plus the subjunctive, right? And it's a marker that's denoting purpose. That is hina. It's denoting purpose or aim or the goal. And in this case, avton is the direct object for the subjunctive, and the prepositional phrase in tis ethnisen is the indirect object. So he's saying, in order that I should proclaim good news about him among the Gentiles. So the only other thing to speak about here is eptheos, and eptheos is an adverb. Again, notice the os ending. I want to pay attention to morphology. So you've got eptheos, simply means immediately or at once. Mark, the Gospel of Mark loves to use a derivative of this word, which just means immediately. And here it's expressing the idea that while Paul will eventually consult sarkike haimati, which in this case happens to be the apostolus, the apostles, he will eventually consult them. That will happen at some point, that he does not do so immediately. He does not do so eptheos. Mark loves this term, as I said, but he uses the term epthus, which is just epthus, and Paul loves that expression, and he uses it all the time in the Gospel of Mark. And so just pay attention to the difference of spelling there. It's just another spelling for the same adverb. But evtheos is the more common Hellenistic form. So actually, you know, this is classical Greek, Attic Greek, and here, you're moving into Hellenistic Greek, and that's why there's a change in spelling from evthus to evtheus. But just good to note that the language degrades, but the more common Hellenistic form is evtheos. And then Paul ends the verse with a verb, this aorist middle indicative pros on nethemain, and the dative complement sarki ke haimati, and the verb is negated. So he's saying that right here is the negation, that he did not do something, he did not consult, confer with, right? Flesh and blood. Pros anethemain is this is a second aorist form, and it comes from the athematic conjugation, right? Which we call me verbs, words that end in me. And so this comes from pros anetithemi, typically means to add something to an existing amount. So if you have this many dollars and you add something to it, now you've got this many dollars. That's the word picture. I'm adding to this so that I end up with more. Uh, that's the word picture for pros anethemain or pros anetithemi. And you're going to see that exact use in Galatians 2:6, where Paul's going to use it that way. But it also has another meaning, and here it doesn't mean to add something. It wouldn't make sense in context, right? He wouldn't say, I immediately did not add something to flesh and blood. No, it carries another nuance, and the other nuance it carries is to consult with or to confer, right? To seek counsel from. That's the idea here of pros anitithemi when he's talking about pros anitithemiing with sarki and aimati. So which has attestation outside of the New Testament, with pros anitithemi being used this way. The word and the way you know that it's going to be used this way is if what follows pros anitithemi is a dative, and that's exactly what you have. So when you pros anitithemi in the dative, you're always dealing with consulting, conferring, seeking counsel from, that sort of an idea, and not this one adding to. Okay, if it doesn't follow, if a dative doesn't follow, you're likely here in terms of that meaning semantically. So that will help you as you come across pros anitithemi in the text. Diodorus Siculus uses this expression pros anitithemi quite a bit, and he uses it exclusively as a way to refer to consulting or taking counsel with other people, and he's constantly using it with a dative to follow. Okay, Galatians 1:17 then. Ude anelthon is Jerusalema pros tus pra imu apostolus ala apelthon is Arabian Gepalen ipastrepsa is Damascon. Nor, so you got another negation starting out this verse, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles prior to me. Instead, or but I like the word instead here. Instead, I went away into Arabia and again returned unto Damascus. All right, so let's kind of break that down. On elthone, you've got your verb here, aorist active indicative from on erkomai, which just comes from ana and then erchomai, and this is a crassus of these two words. It's just a prepositional prefix. Ana means to go up. The word means to move from a lower place up to a higher place. It's like going upstairs or moving in this direction. On erkomai. And it was characteristic to speak, especially of one's journey to Jerusalem, as going up. So Jerusalem is up here, and they're going up to Jerusalem. He's going up to Jerusalem. Josephus uses the word on elthone in the same way to speak of coming up out of the river. You just have the prepositional prefix ana. This is what's giving its direction. So that again, pay attention to morphology. This is what's giving it the direction of up, because it's just erkomai, to go. And in a minute, you're going to see the same word, but you're just going to change the prepositional prefix. In here, we're going to be going away. So here we're going up, and here we're going away, and the only difference is the prepositional prefix. So you want to be paying attention to these compound words that use prepositional prefixes. And then you have prostus pro imu apostolus. Paul uses here, I like this, prostus pro imu apostolus, a small hyperbaton. We talked about this before. And hyperbaton is the space in between the article and the noun, which in this case is this little gap right here. It's just a prepositional prefix, uh, not prefix, a prepositional phrase that's used right here parenthetically in the middle of a larger section where you got the definite article going with this noun. So it breaks that up. So essentially what he's saying is, nor did I go up to Jerusalem before to the before me apostles. And by using this hyperbaton, what he's doing is he's emphasizing this pro emu before me. That so he's not just saying, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to the apostles. He wants to make very emphatic, I did not go up to Jerusalem to the apostles, namely the ones that were before me, because it may have been argued that because they preceded Paul, because they were before him, they were therefore more important. And by him going up to them, he needed to consult with the guys that were, right, the original guys. And he's saying it's actually none of that. In fact, when God revealed the gospel to me, I didn't even bother going up before these guys. I did not bother going up before the apostles. And by the way, the before me apostles, the ones that were the originals, the ones that were there well before me, I didn't bother going up to them. What did he do? But you got this again, introducing a strong contrast, which Runge calls a point counterpoint set. So this is point one, right? And this is the counterpoint. I did not go up to Jerusalem to the apostles, the ones before me or preceding me, but instead, what did he do? I went away to Arabia and again returned unto Damascus. That's what I did. I didn't do what you think I probably should have done. I didn't do any of that. I just went up. I just went over to Arabia, and so Paul. What does Paul do here? He just ends this section here. This is one other thing to mention about this hyperbaton. I just like this, right? That so you see pra imu sandwich between tous apostolus, and it's just good Greek structure. This is an example of why word order in Greek does actually matter, contrary to popular sentiments that would, like to argue that word order is just more arbitrary in Greek. It's not. It's often very intentional and it's highly structured. So just wanted to make that point. And then Allah again introducing the strong contrast. And so we end this section with in the first clause, as I said, we have um, on erkomai, and here we have apa erkomai, op elthon, and this is just, the first clause, he's using on erkomai, and now he's using op erkomai, and the root word is the same. It's just the prepositions that are directional in nature have shifted. It's the difference between going up and going away. So he went away to Arabia, and then again he returned Epastrepsa, where unto Damascus. Okay, so there's a lot here. So like if we were to put this together in a diagram, you can kind of see how all this flows together. And so notice this. So you've got da there at the top, and actually, when you're looking at the text, where does da show up? Well, um, it's actually right here in verse 15. But on the diagram, it's clearer to put it here because what's he saying in verse 15, right? He's saying, but when it pleased God, the one who separated me from my mother's womb, right, and called me through his generous kindness, this section. And so, which is this coming down, but when God, when it, when it pleased God, or when it pleased the one right here, the one who separated me, right, from the womb of my mother, and the one who called me through his generous kindness, when it pleased this God, what? Infinitive, to reveal object, the Son, his Son, to reveal in me, indirect object, the Son of him, to reveal him to me, in order that, the subjunctive, I might preach him in tis ethnes and among the Gentiles. Sorry, when it pleased God, right, the one who separated me and called me. Notice the one who separated and the one who called, and then the object is here, me, one who separated and called me. But when it pleased this God, right? And he's saying immediately, and this is where we go back, if we're looking at the text, um, and you see the we've got hey kusate garten emen anastrophe pote into judaismo. Notice that he's saying here that you've got this neither nor setup. Immediately, right? I did not consult with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to the apostles, the emu, the ones before me. I did not do that, right? I did not consult and I did not go up. But what did I do? I went away unto Arabia and returned, Paulin, again unto Damascus. So actually, if you're looking at this text, um, you're grabbing this verse 15, and you've got a lot of content here, but you can look at all the modifiers, the way we can kind of break this down to just kind of map it out. It really helps the diagram so that you get a good sense as to where your infinitives are, right, where your indirect objects are, where your direct objects are, where your compound subjects are, your compound verbal ideas, where your adversatives are, your contrast, your point counterpoint sets, your temporal clauses, your subject, your verb, your matrix verbs, right? Your adversative, again, particles here, your prepositional phrases, and your genitive modifiers, your purpose clauses, your subjunctive and direct object, and indirect object, and so it's just helpful to map it out. So I really highly encourage diagramming as a discipline. It's just very important. So that's enough on Galatians chapter 1, 13 through 17. And in the next video, we'll pick it up with verse 18 and finish up the chapter.